Come read with me. Reading from Six of One, Half a Dozen the Other, my autobiography, and I'm reading Out on the Farm. Chickens are wandering around my feet here while I'm reading. Inside the country house, it had a very straight, steep staircase between the bathroom and the living room and led to two upstairs bedrooms. The bottom of the staircase opened into the large oblong kitchen that traversed the north end of the house. We often played on the staircase because it was the perfect place to ride down on couch cushions. The one bathroom led off of the kitchen and had a door on the opposite side that led to my parents' bedroom. There was a screened-in porch along the front of the house that led out to the front yard. A sidewalk led to the street. The house had a long living room on the east side of the house and one bedroom on the southwest corner of the house behind Mom and Daddy's room. That room was shared by Dee and Fonda. The rest of us children slept upstairs, the boys in the east room and the girls in the west. We had no heat upstairs, and the bedrooms were very chilly in the winter. Heat for the entire house was provided by a square floor furnace near the center of the living room along the east wall. The house was very old and must have at one time had some sort of freestanding heater, because there were round holes in the center walls joining the two upstairs bedrooms that contained a chimney. The round holes where a stovepipe might have once been were hidden with pie plate covers. The downstairs room had them also. There was a swinging door between the kitchen and the living room, and the kitchen had exterior doors both at the east and west ends of the room. The west door led into the side yard where the driveway was, and north of this, the back property and the barn. There were 2 acres. The old barn came equipped with a borrowed gelding that reportedly had once been a rodeo horse. This horse had a personality all his own, and he provided us with plenty of cheap entertainment. Daddy fixed up a small room in the barn and installed a heat lamp for raising baby chicks. It was less expensive than buying them full grown. On the side of the room, he built a little door for the chicks to go in and out during the daylight hours. He built a wire enclosure to keep them confined that was covered with chicken wire to keep out predators. We often killed the pullets for supper and when they grew large enough for a meal. As the chickens grew large enough, they would roam the yard at will during the day. At night, they would return to the roost. Trying to catch them was often tricky. Catching the chickens was usually the boys' job. Mama would tell us not to frighten them because it would make the meat slimy. So we fashioned a hook from a clothes hanger wire and tried to sneak up on them. It was not an easy task. If we were able to get close enough to them, snagging their leg quickly was imperative, so they could not get away. The chickens would squawk and flap their wings and generally make a loud ruckus. Then if we could turn them upside down, they would calm down, right down. Then the dirty work could be done. We had an old stump near the barn, which was used for butchering the chickens. The person doing the deed would hold the chicken by the legs and lay their head across the chopping block. The chicken would generally lie there docile. Then the boy would chop off the chicken's head with an axe and toss the chicken onto the ground. The reason for tossing it was that when the chicken's head is chopped off, they would flop and run around, covering a large area, bleeding all over anything in its path. Thus the old adage, running around like a chicken with its head cut off. Once the chicken stopped trouncing around the yard, it was time to dip the headless creature into a pan of boiling water waiting nearby. Once the chicken was dipped, the plucking of the feathers was very easy and was done by the younger kids. The wet, smelly feathers were tossed onto the ground and left. Once the chicken was plucked, it had to be cut open and gutted. This chore usually went to the boys also. It was important to remember to remove the gizzard from below the neck. It was like a tough round muscle full of sand and rocks that ground the food for the bird. Chickens have no teeth. By slicing the gizzard and removing the inner membrane holding the gravel, the gizzard, like the rest of the chicken, was ready for cooking. Then the naked chicken would be taken to the kitchen to be cut up, battered, and fried for dinner. It was a group effort, just getting food to the table. If we had hens that stopped laying or a rooster that was not needed, they were too tough to fry, so we made soup from them. We were seldom without something to entertain us in the country. When we played inside the barn, Shorty, the horse who was on the outside, would find a place where the boards in the wall had a wide space and try to stick his head through. Since those gaps were seldom more than a couple of inches wide, it was quite funny from our side of the wall. He would thrust his upper lip through the hole and, straining to reach us, would wiggle his folded lip up in a funny up and down motion. Shorty provided us with hours of entertainment. We didn't care that he was barn sour and would always run back to the barn whenever we led him away. I suspect that Shorty may have been a barrel racer. Each time we took him to the far end of the pasture, he would walk slowly enough there, but as soon as he reached the fence, it was his cue to turn and make a beeline at full speed back to the barn. We had no formal training of any kind with horses, and this one became quite a source of pleasure for us, as well as to all those who came around to watch. Often one of the children would invite a friend home from church to spend the afternoon. It was the custom of the older kids to coerce these unsuspecting victims to take a ride on Shorty. Many of those children had been raised in town. They, like us, had never been exposed to horses. The older kids would assure the visitor that the horse was perfectly safe and very gentle. They would even prove it by climbing on bareback. When this wasn't convincing enough, they would put one of the smaller children onto the back of the horse. All this was happening near the feeding trough behind the barn. That was all it took. It was plain to see that a horse as gentle enough for the little kids was safe to ride. As soon as the small fry would get off, the unwitting customer climbed on. With the help of the wooden feeding stall at the front of the pasture, it was relatively easy to climb on Shorty's back. We had no saddle, so all rides were via horse bareback. Someone would maneuver Shorty parallel to the feeding stall so that the unsuspecting visitor, get down from there, get up. Sorry about that, the chicken was on the chair. Where are we at here? The unsuspecting visitor, would climb up onto the wooden stall and easily step up over the back of the horse. The guest would then ride at a leisurely pace to the far end of the pasture, thoroughly enjoying the nice, easy ride, unsuspecting of the adventure close at hand. About the time they had gained a sense of comfort and security, they would reach the back fence. The ride then took on a new dimension. Immediately, Shorty, without warning, would wheel around, and before the rider could get a firm grip or latch with their heels, bolt like a rocket toward the barn, sometimes with his rider still intact, but more often than not, leaving them firmly seated somewhere in the middle of the pasture. I'm pretty sure that the horse, having been around us for a while, had a sense of humor and enjoyed this game as much as we did. Animals were responsible for a lot of our entertainment as well as mishaps. Dee and Randall were trying to catch a little black calf with a rope. The calf, most likely, my hair is just tickling my face all crazy. The calf most likely had been newly purchased from the livestock auction and had been raised in an open pasture. Randall and Dee somehow managed to get the rope on him, but were not strong enough to hold him. He barreled out through the barn, dragging Dee behind him. She got quite a bump on the head that sort of knocked her senseless. She had a short case of amnesia. Mama took her to the church and had her prayed for, and then she seemed to be okay. The country place was great for a large family. There were many things in the country to occupy us. It bothered us little that we had few toys. We found plenty of things to do. Along the west side of the property was an irrigation ditch. Growing along this ditch were a row of very old eucalyptus trees. They must have been 50 feet tall at least. Beneath the trees and along the ditch grew large clumps of peppermint, which we tunneled through and made into a hideout. The trees not only provided us with plenty of shade from the hot summer sun, but they had dusty green branches that fairly swept the ground, much like weeping willows. We used these tendrils as we had seen Tarzan do in the TV movies. The twin sisters, who were Joyce's age, were there. They're friends. We were showing off and having a great time swinging from the limbs. The twins were what I would call ample. They were from a family of ample parents and one ample older sister. They made quite a contrast to us children who were thin and gangly. The ditch bank was slightly higher than the rest of the yard and made a perfect place to shove off with a branch. We would all form a line, usually with the oldest child first in line. Each in turn, walking out to the edge of the tree, the child would grab a sturdy-looking branch, back up with it to his or her hands until he or she was at the highest point on the ditch bank. Usually there was a hesitation as the child gathered their courage. Then, thrusting themselves off the top of the bank with their feet, they would bellow mightily. Ah! Out we would fly, swinging as far as the branch would take us and swinging back again to the bank. As soon as our feet hit the bank, the next child would grab the branch. Then the one who had just swung would return to the end of the line to wait another turn. It was great fun, and we entertained ourselves this way for hours. Finally, after many swings by the older kids, it was my turn. I chose my branch, reaching as high as I could, backed up to the bank, and shoved off with a tremendous yodel. It was a glorious swing. Since I was so light and thin, my flight was higher than usual. I swung out to the farthest reaches of the branch, feet sticking straight out. Then, just as the branch reached its limit, it snapped. The branch released its grasp on the tree and sent me flying into the driveway. I landed, still clutching the broken branch, flat on my back in the dirt. I knew I was alive, but that was all. The breath was knocked from my lungs and I could not get any air. Everyone rushed to me asking, "Are you all right?" I was trying to tell them I could not breathe. I formed the words, but no sound came out. Finally, after what seemed like minutes, but in reality was mere seconds, I jumped up and ran screaming silently into the house. "I can't breathe! I can't breathe!" Mama came rushing to meet me, and shortly afterward my breath returned. To make sure I was okay, she made me lie on the couch for the remainder of the day. My fun was over. The other children, undaunted, continued their game. Living in the country had some advantages. We were able to keep animals that would supplement the family's food supply. Chickens, turkeys, pigs, rabbits, and a calf were kept in enclosures out by the barn. The pigs weren't particular about what they had to eat, and they got a concoction called slop. Occasionally, when a chicken or a turkey would stick their head through the boards of the pig pen to try and snatch a bite of slop, they would lose their head. The pig would bite it right off. The slop consisted of day-old, moldy bread, which my parents bought from the bakery in large paper barrels, grain, and all the vegetable trimmings and leftovers of garbage from the kitchen. This mixture was blended together in large metal barrels and soaked with water. When it began to ferment, it was ready to serve. Each day, more garbage, bread, and water were added to the barrel to keep the concoction going. One of the younger boys was usually responsible for the job of taking out the garbage after supper. This job usually fell to 8-year-old Bert, or Rex, who was 7 at the time. Since we often ate supper late, it was usually dark by the time the table was cleared and the garbage had to be taken out. In the country, there were no streetlights, and on moonless nights, the dark could be oppressive. To a small boy of 7 or 8, it could be pretty spooky out at night. Randall, who was about 15 years old at the time, loved to tease the younger children and play practical jokes on any unsuspecting soul that happened too near his domain. It was late evening and supper was finished. Rex was dispatched to take the garbage out to the pig barrel. He was hesitant because it was a long way to the barn and back, and it was awfully dark. He was encouraged by Randall. "Don't worry, there's nothing out there." So gathering his courage, Rex crept stealthily out to the pig pen, carrying a heaping plate of leftovers in his hands. He turned his head and this way and that, looking all the time for any goblin or creature that might be lurking in the darkness. As soon as Rex was far enough into the darkness that he could no longer be seen, Randall sneaked outside and crouched down behind the short picket fence that was just outside the kitchen door. There was a porch light that illuminated the porch area and the south side of the picket fence. Randall was hidden on the north side in the dark. The inside door to the kitchen was open, but the screen door was closed to keep the night-flying insects out. Rex came creeping warily back and was almost to the light of the porch and safety when Randall jumped from his hiding place with a terrible scream. Rex jumped backwards, threw the plate straight up into the air, and flew up the porch steps to the kitchen door. He was so terrified that he did not stop to look at what had scared him. In sheer panic, he grabbed the handle of the door and began yanking and tugging on it. Try frantically as he did, the door would not open. In his excitement, he had placed his foot too close to the door, and he himself was blocking it from opening. He calmed down finally and realized that he had been the recipient of another of Randall's pranks. Needless to say, he was none too eager to take out the garbage the next time. Aside from practical jokes, there was plenty of other forms of entertainment. Back near the irrigation ditch, under the eucalyptus trees, there was an ancient green John Deere tractor which had a huge metal flywheel on the side of the motor that at one time had been used to start it. I don't think the tractor was still functional, but as a toy it was great fun. With a little team effort, we discovered that we could, with much work, turn the flywheel backward, which would enable us to roll the tractor to the top of the ditch bank. Once there, the person who was fast enough to climb onto the tractor seat could then have a glorious ride down the ditch bank and into the driveway. It was a lot of work getting the tractor back up the hill, but we seldom tired of the game. Fortunately, no one was ever mowed down by the runaway tractor. Near the same area on the property, but closer to the well house, was an old black car that was also defunct. And though we were never allowed to play in it, we often played around it. One of my favorite things to do with the car in the summertime was to melt crayons on its hot black fenders. Not only did it create some interesting patterns, but I loved the smell of the melted crayon wax. Dorothy, who was about 3 or 4 at the time, had been playing out by the black car. She came into the house and walked up to my dad's recliner, where he could be found most any time, and opening her hand, she said, "Look, Daddy, what I found." On her open palm, she held a very large and very much alive black widow spider. I have never seen Daddy come out of his chair so fast before or since. He slapped the spider out of her hand and stepped on it. She was unharmed. It is at times like that that we know without a doubt that God has his angels watching over us. 1960 was, as I said, a busy year. Lots of things were taking place. I do not know how they all got crammed into one year, but they surely did. 1960 was the year I got my first set of watercolor paints for Christmas, and I became a true artist. We had no watercolor paper for me to paint on, but the paints were the genuine article. I took an old white sheet and tore it into pieces sufficiently large enough to paint on. These I placed on the table, wet them thoroughly to keep them in place, and not having any instruction or experience, I used the paints directly from the tubes and painted several beautiful watercolors. I found a picture in the magazine for Art Instruction Schools Draw Me contest. I drew the picture freehand and sent it off with high hopes. Surprisingly, a representative from the school showed up at the door one day wanting to enroll me in the course. It was plain to see that my parents could not afford the $500 for the course, and I spent the next few years dreaming of attending art school. 1960 was also the year As I said earlier, Mama's life became so intertwined with that of the church that church meetings were primarily source of activity outside of home. I realized that because the marriage between my parents was difficult, the church fulfilled a need in her life not met by Daddy. Every Sunday morning, Sunday night, Tuesday night, Thursday night, and when there were evangelists holding revivals every weeknight, was spent at church. Usually, all of the children were required to go with her. Most of us did not complain, as it was a social outlet for us as well. And I'm going to pause this, and I'm going to skip the next chapter. If you want to read the next chapter, which is, I just say I don't really want to talk about it. Anyway, you can get the book from Amazon and read it.